Welcome to Hello Kind Soul Podcast, where we raise the vibration of kindness on a global scale. I'm Dr. Ebony Green, your host, and I'm super excited to be with you today. If you want to follow us on all major platforms, look us up at Hello Kind Soul Podcast. And if you want to follow me, look me up at eGreen Equity. I hope you enjoy the episode. Have a great day. Welcome to Hello Kind Soul Podcast. I'm Dr. Ebony Green, and I am your host. I'm super excited to be in community with you today. Today, we're actually going to go off and really think about this idea of grieving, right? I had an amazing conversation this morning, which I think really kind of leads me to say, like, today is the moment we stop and really think about, like, what does grieving really mean to us, right? What does that process feel like? And how do we give ourselves permission to do so, right? And so I was talking with someone who really just means the world to me. We were chatting about how in some regards, there are some of us that are always the strong friend, right? We're the people that people go to when they need help, they need support, they need to be cared for, nurtured, et cetera. And within that realm, sometimes we feel unable to kind of walk outside that box and be vulnerable and to be who we really are. And so she mentioned a book. I think the name of the title is something, I Hate Mornings, but the book is specifically about the grieving process, right? How we get to this place in life if we neglect to really process the situations and experiences that we've had and we hit the wall. And what does that look like, right? And so when I started to think about it, I was like, yep, I know exactly where that moment is and how that feels like, right? And I can say that because I've shared on the other episodes, there was a moment where I just hit the wall. But what I didn't realize and what I didn't really process in that moment, which today that awareness kind of came to me, was like, oh, you weren't just in a place of sadness, but you were in a place of grieving, and you never gave yourself permission to grieve. So what does that look like, feel like, and sound like in real time, right? Like, when we really sit back and think about how much we give ourselves permission to just do things that are actually very natural to being human, but often something that we feel restricted, it was to think about this notion of grieving, right? And so first it's to say, when we're thinking about grieving, I want us to kind of define that, not so much by, Merriam-Webster, but just in the loose framing that grieving is the process of letting go, right? Of the end of something. And I think when we think about grieving, we automatically go to death and dying, right? Which is a natural, through line. I could go and sit there with you. But I want to talk about the other components of grieving that we don't really talk about in that context, right? I want us to think about this notion of like the ending of something or the letting go of something. So whether that's like a relationship, like an intimate relationship, whether that's a friendship, whether that's a job, each time you move from season to season, you're actually grieving. And I think we overcomplicate it and oversimplify what that is and what that feels like, right? So when I think about like grieving, there was a season where I left my job, which, isn't so unique for most people, right? All of us leave jobs at different times. What was unique was I was leaving my job when I was in the K-12 system, which I had been in my entire career, and I was going off to work at a nonprofit. And what I never really expected was like the weight of that when I looked back and it finally was done and I finally left was like, you just left the thing that was super comfortable for you. You just left the thing that you're clear how to be in, how to exist in, how to thrive in, to go take this chance and opportunity, right? So that's one form of grieving that I wasn't really prepared for. Because in my thought, it was like, okay, I'm leaving this job and I'm going to go do this job. I didn't understand that each job was vastly different from the other. And that there was a level of comfort that I experienced being in that place. Like I knew what to do. I knew what the expectations was. I knew how to exist within that realm. And it felt very familiar. Right. And so for me, this idea of grieving also makes me think about like that letting go of the season and the grieving of that season, for me personally, is also connected to the feeling of home, of familiar, of safety, right? It's letting go of the shore and hoping and knowing to some extent that I know how to get back to that shore because that shore is home, that shore is safety, right? That shore is comfort. And so when we're in any season that requires us to like move from this place of comfort to uncertainty, there's a grieving of the familiarity and the safety in that, right? I'm gonna say that for the people in the back. There's a grieving of the familiarity and the safety of that. And so when you leave a job, that's the challenge, right? So let's pan over to relationships, right, for a minute. Um, Part of it, I would think about even relationships, right? There are people who stay in relationships forever that they don't want to be in, right? And part of the reason they stay there is because there's the comfort and the familiarity. So if you leave that, you're leaving the safety of the shore. And so it's this grieving of like what I knew and what it was as opposed to where I'm going and the unknown piece of that, right? And that could be really heavy, especially if we are running so fast, we don't actually have the chance to think about what we're doing before we do it, right? Because there are these moments that we are moving so fast. And I was talking this morning about this notion of frenzied movement, right? I struggle with people around me who are constantly moving and they're moving at a pace that's way further than my brain can really comprehend, and they're talking fast. And it gives me a sense of uncomfortability. I'm like, whew, right? But there are moments of my life that I lived that way for years, right? And it was this process of running and running and running and running and running and running. And the problem with that is you hit the wall, right? You realize that in your experience of running, you're living. And you're missing the beautiful moments of presence in those moments because you're trying to get somewhere so fast. And here's the challenge with that. When we shift from season, from person to person, from job to job, right? From friend to friend, each movement requires a moment of grieving. And oftentimes we don't have the time to do that because we have to do this thing called life. I promise you, I've said this multiple times, at this point, thousands of times, you will make time for your wellness or you will make time for your sickness. And when you're running that fast and you're not grieving, I'm curious, where does the lack of grieving manifest in our bodies or in our hearts or in our minds, right? Like what happens to us when we're not grieving the loss? And the other thing we don't often talk about or even really contemplate is like, what happens when we lose friends, right? There are moments where as we're moving and we're growing and we're evolving, our friendships don't always align, right? How many people talk about, I know Tommy from the block, we grew up, we used to hang out at each other's houses, we used to play ball together, whatever. And then their lives kind of go separate paths, right? And then you don't really think about it. You just kind of go on to the next friend. But that was a whole season of your life that brought you a level of joy and comfort and happiness that you just walk away from. And so the reason I'm being very intentional about talking about grieving, not in the context of death, because, there's a difference between being alive and living. They feel very different. And when we're thinking about like, what does it feel like to live your whole life? And as you lose things and as you move on to seasons, you never turn around to consider them. You never turn around to consider what is, right? And so in talking with this person this morning, we talked about like sometimes life is so challenging that when someone says, how you doing? You don't even know the answer because you don't know if the normal is actually normal or not anymore because your life is changing. And so there's a need to grieve like who I was a month ago, who's not who I am right now. And I don't always have the information to know if next month will be any different. And so I went from a place of comfort and safety to say like, this is what my life is. This is what I'm doing. And then you're thrown this curveball. And so a month later, now you're living in this situation, this context, which feels vastly different, right? With a level of pain that you didn't have a month ago. So you're like, okay, is this now normal? Do I have to grieve that season because I'll never get that comfort, that peace, that calm, that feeling of wellness again? And so now you're in this season, and so you have to grieve this one, right? And a month from now, it could be different. I don't want it to seem like I'm overcomplicating it or oversimplifying it. But what I am going to say, as I started, was like, we have a lot of strong friends. I have a ton of them. And I'm the strong friend for many of my friends. And there's these moments that I've had to like, I call it the Mule Syndrome. I'm making this up, but just go with me for a minute. So I'm one of these people, like you ever see a kid, if you have kids, anybody who's watching this, you have children and you're walking with little Mikey down the street and about a quarter of a mile in, Mikey's done. Mikey's tired. He's like, I'm finished. I'm not walking anymore. And Mikey sits in the street. Like he just sits like a mule. He was refusing to move. Why is Mikey refusing to move? Because he's done, right? And so when I think about what I call the Mule Syndrome, it's like I am moving and doing and doing and doing and caring and I'm done. So I'm gonna take a break and I'm gonna just sit. And then nothing gets done. Work doesn't get done. Connections doesn't get done. Communication doesn't get done. Checking in, like nothing gets done, right? And when you think about that, I laugh at it because I do it often. And you would think like, sometimes people think and they think of me and think I know more than I know, but I only know what I know. I don't know more than that, right? Because we're all a work in progress. So there are these moments where I'm just kind of like, I'm done. And that moment happened recently, right? Anybody who follows me on Instagram knows I used to post every single day a message, to lift people up. And I talked to someone before I actually came here, and he was like, Ab, not for nothing, like you haven't posted in like 3 weeks. And I'm like, no, I posted a picture yesterday. It was a picture. It wasn't even a real post. It was a picture. And I posted on Facebook, and I went back and posted another one on Instagram, right? But his point was like, you're always the bright light in the room. And I said, you know what, bro? I think I burnt out. Like the bulb is out. I'm exhausted. I'm mentally exhausted. I'm tired. And the reason I'm saying it out loud is to hopefully normalize it for somebody else who's the strong friend, right? It is okay to be exhausted. It is okay to rest. Rest in some regard, I've said before, is resistance. Like there's this natural predisposition in people who fix things, who help people, the problem solvers, to keep going, right? The whole reason I mentioned that book is because the person who wrote it was that person. She was the problem solver. And then she just had a meltdown and didn't understand why, like, she just kept crying and was just kind of a hot mess, right? And I think there's a beauty in saying, like, sometimes we just have to fall apart to put it all back together, right? There's freedom in falling apart. There's a freedom in saying, I don't know. There's a freedom in saying, I'm done. There's a freedom in saying, I'm scared. There's a freedom in saying, like, I don't have the capacity to be what you need me to be today or tomorrow. And so I just need to be honest with that, right? And honor that place of like, there are all these things that I've endured in the last 10 years of my life that I've never talked about out loud, and I've never processed or understood how they were affecting me emotionally. And I've come to this moment that I'm going to honor me, that it's going to be my season, that I take time to heal deeply, that I take time to process the pain, that I take time to grieve the losses, whether it's of a parent, whether it's of a relationship to a parent, whether it's a relationship to an intimate partner, whether it's a relation to a family member or a sibling or a son or a daughter. We lose things in this world, for real. We lose things. We lose valuable relationships that poured into us and valuable relationships we've poured into others. And it's okay to say, like, while I may not like you anymore, there are all these beautiful moments that meant so much to me, that I valued so deeply. And I'm going to miss the healthy versions of us. Right? Like, I think the thing that leads most of us to leave, relationships is that it's easy to identify the toxicity. And so that's really what leads us to be like, oh, I'm out, you're nuts, we're done. But there are moments where we lose, like even with my exes, like they're exes, right? But each and every one of them, there were moments that I really will always cherish. And I don't have to throw that out to acknowledge that you weren't for me. It can be that we had these great moments and you weren't for me, right? And I'm really glad I figured it out. But part of the grieving allows us to be able to look back in hindsight and see some of the beauty that the pain covers over, right? Like when my dad passed away, for years, I was just so mad that, because I was also young, but there's still moments and memories that I have of him. But when I'm sitting in that place called pain, like it's just smeared all over the reflection, right? The rear view mirror, like you can't see to the places that were beautiful, that were joyous, that were life-giving, that was rejuvenative, right? You just miss it because you're so angry at those different moments. If you leave a job that you once loved and then you hit a rough patch and for whatever reason, that particular place no longer aligned to you and you leave it, I can still be appreciative of the season in its totality was beautiful. There was this moment where I realized we no longer align, but it certainly doesn't dismiss the beauty of the journey, right? Because there are these moments where I think we get so hyper fixated on the promised land, getting there, that we don't realize that the middle passage is where the magic actually happens, right? Like today I said, if I become a millionaire, if I just get to being a millionaire, like if tomorrow I become a millionaire, like don't get me wrong, if anybody wants to send me millions, have at it, bro. I'm all in. But if I just become a millionaire and I don't remember and I'm not present in all of the middle passage, the millions actually has less value than I thought it would. When I become a millionaire, and then you can think back on all the hard seasons and the fun seasons and the joyous seasons and the challenge, all of that, then you can understand the value of that million. So when we think about this notion of grieving, like my goal is like, one, the grieving piece is to understand that it's done, right? And there's a whole cycle of grief, right? There's anger, there's, rage, there's tears, there's forgiveness, there's all these steps to it. And there's more, but I'm just giving you generalities. But when I think about this idea of grieving, like it took me time, no matter what I was looking at, what situation it was. So one is to grant yourself grace and permission to take the time you need in the season. Two, I had to honor that in the same day I can have a moment of gratitude and a moment of anger. And it wasn't an if or, but it was a both and. I was grateful I woke up, and I was angry that I felt the level of pain I felt. And that's okay. Processing through that. It's to acknowledge that this is a journey, folks. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And it takes time to kind of work through your thoughts, emotions, whatever. And also, like, sometimes grieving that you stayed too long. Like, there are people I know who grieve because they're so angry that they stayed too long in a situation that wasn't good for them. And I see that a lot in people who work in toxic workplaces. I mean, forget the people with their relationships, right? But if you think about how many people will say, I stayed at this job and they devalued me and they disrespected me and they didn't see my value and worth, but I stayed because I thought that's all I had. When that person gets the strength or the opportunity to leave and they talk about that job in retrospect, part of their statement is like, I can't believe I stayed and wasted, right? The term people use is wasted all this time. So fill in whatever situation. But the part that people struggle to forgive is what they think is wasted time. Here's the beauty of it. And I hope this helps somebody out there. I didn't waste a moment of my time. I might have been in a place that was unfulfilling, potentially problematic, challenging, toxic. But every single moment that you are gifted the opportunity to breathe real air is a moment that you can learn something from to implement in your life. There is nothing about you, your journey, or your experience that is a waste of your time. In the moment, we see it as we wasted time, but I promise you there was a ton of lessons in that time that were valuable to you, that you took from that. And you were like, oh, okay. So if you grant yourself the grace and you process through that grieving period, I promise you, when you look back on that moment, you're like, oh, I didn't waste time. This was me repeating experiences that were counterintuitive to my wellness, and I had to keep repeating them until I understood it and could see my value. This was me exercising patience and trying to help a person become their better self. This was me trying to influence a system to not harm kids, but instead to educate them and to love them, right? That wasted time was not wasted. Some of that wasted time was you shoring up and preparing the strength within you, because the battle you were about to fight was far harder and greater than you could have ever imagined, right? And so now you're on the other side of it and you get to look back. You didn't waste any of the time, folks. Like, every experience we have for a reason. And while, believe you me, there are many I wish I may not have had in the moment, I am so grateful because every one of those experiences, bad or good, brought me to today, brought me to who I am. And if I might say, I'm not so bad. So had I not had those experiences, I wouldn't be here. My push for you today is this. We all have an opportunity to grieve. We all are worthy of creating the space to feel what we feel in real time, to process the wins and the losses, to understand what we had and, for whatever reason, what we let go of, right? But I want us to think about grieving in the real terms of it, of letting go, because I think part of the letting go is the anger of letting go of it, right? Letting go is the hurt, the pain of it all, right? Because as we start to heal and give ourselves permission to really understand and appreciate the love that was in that situation, right? The more we're able to look back and really look honestly at it and extract some of the lessons, keep some of the memories, and hold on to some of the joy. So I'm going to stop there, but I'm going to let you know, Give yourself permission to grieve, folks. You have the opportunity to do so, and you deserve that. All right? I hope you have an amazing week. I will see you soon. Until then, subscribe. I think it's right here. Push the up button, like it, share it, subscribe. Until then, I see you soon. Take care.